Hi friends! Today we're going to be talking about my Instagram photos and how I do my flat lays. So if you're not aware, if you didn't come over here from Instagram, I do my flat lays for my Bookstagram a little bit different than other people, at least as far as I've seen. So when you think of Bookstagram, you think of a certain aesthetic. I like to say it's cozy beige girl aesthetic. Not my vibe. As you can see behind me, this is very much the vibe here. Bright, colorful, maximalist, okay? So when I do my Bookstagram flat lays, that is the same exact approach I am taking. I will show you some examples in just a moment, but stick around if you want to find out how I accomplish these photos, and if you'd like to do kind of similar things, you're going to find out how you can do that too. So starting off, like I said, I kind of want to show you just some quick examples here on the screen of kind of my style when it comes to Bookstagram flat lays. So here they are. We'll get into the details of how exactly I compose these shots and my method for creating these shots in just a minute. Okay, so for the book, for this tutorial, I chose The Dragons of Nova by Elise Kova. So this cover, I'll go ahead and insert some close-ups here. So this cover is really colorful. I love the way they redid these covers for these paperbacks. It has a lot going on, but I specifically chose it because the colors are very interesting and the cover overall I think is beautiful on its own. So I just kind of want my setup to complement it. All right, so this part is just going to be voiceover. So we're going to switch over to voiceover Aaron and we'll go from there. All right, so here is the setup we're kind of working with. The first thing I do is look at the book. Like I said before, you got to look at the book and kind of figure out what you're working with. You can tell this a lot of the time from the cover, but it does help sometimes if you have read the book as well. You don't have to read the book to do these shots. That's not a requirement here. So what we're looking for on the book is kind of the vibe, the theme of the book. Like, is it fantasy? Is it romance? Is it a mix of the two? You know, what's the vibe? We're looking for dominant colors. So on this one, we're looking at blue, gold, or yellow. I see some red. That's pretty much it. That's what we're working with here. A lot of greens. I mean, you can see in the cover that there's actually flowers. That's always great. That makes it super easy if it has flowers or some type of botanical element, in my case. So yeah, we're working with like some roses. There's a garden in the background and a lot of golds, blues, black, rich colors, okay? So you're going to look for the dominant colors. So the very first thing I do is roll out my backdrop. So as you can see, before I roll it out, my rug is very light colored and very colorful. And that's not really the vibe I'm going for the background on these photos. I want the background to disappear in some aspects. So you can use whatever you have for this. You don't have to use black if that's not your vibe. But I use a black paper backdrop. It's just like a piece of construction paper I got from Michael's. And it may seem unnecessary because you're thinking, okay, based on your photos, like these flowers are going to cover most of this up. But I do it to kind of keep the background clean and also ensure any tiny gaps between any of the flowers or the leaves don't show in the photo. So like I said, if I shot right on my carpet in here, it would be crazy. Like you'd see little peaks of orange and pink and it would be too much. So kind of ties things together in post when you're editing. Like I said, you don't have to use black, but you know, you do you. Some people use white. I would opt for a neutral color. Okay, so obviously we're going to address the fact that I'm working on the floor. I do shoot on the floor. It's currently the easiest method for me. It's probably going to be the easiest method for a lot of you. It does make my back hurt really bad after doing this for like an hour or two. They do take a little bit of time to set up, maybe like 20 minutes a piece if I'm being really meticulous. But I am hoping I can like make a standing workstation in the near future. Either way, you're going to want a rather large, open, flat area to work in. Now, to talk about the light, that I use the same light that I'm using for my videos. So it's a pretty just cheap box light that I got on Amazon. It has a diffuser. You're definitely going to want something diffused, and we'll get into that in a minute. You don't need a box light. You could use a ring light. Again, you want something very diffused. You don't want direct beam of light. So a ring light, if you're working with a glossy cover, might not be your best bet. Whatever you do, you need to have a indirect, bright source of light that is, again, diffused. And the reason for this is because if you're working with a glossy cover, it can ruin your shot if you have too much direct light. Especially in my experience, if you're shooting on library books, because they have that like extra clear protective cover on them, and it's really hard to work with sometimes. So if you're trying to avoid like really strong glares on your photos, on your covers, that potentially like obscure the title or the author's name or the art on the cover, you're going to want a bright, indirect, diffused light source. Now, in general, in both my videos and my photography, when I'm shooting in studio like this, I choose a neutral level of warmth and coolness. In my light, I don't want something too warm because it's going to alter the colors in the photo, and I don't want something too cold for the same reason. So I just choose like a closest to daylight setting that you can. Like midday, bright, white light. So based on the vibe of the cover, we're going to go ahead and decide on the overall vibe that we're going for in the photo. So some examples of this are, do you want it to be kind of dark? Do you want the photo to read bright? Do you want it to feel romantic? So typically then I start picking out some background elements. This can be leaves, it could be material, fabric, whatever. You could just use black. I wouldn't, not for my vibe, but yeah, so you want to start out by picking some background elements. You can use other things, like get creative with your materials here. So scarves, you can use clothes, any kind of fabric really, because you're going to be so cropped in that nobody's going to be able to tell what it really is. Personally, I've collected a lot of different kind of interesting textures of things to use in this case over the years. In my experience, thrift stores are a really great place to find background materials for super cheap. So there's a few different ways that I do the next part of the setup. The first is just placing the book right on top of the leaves or whatever I'm using in the background, like I did here. The other ways are to use something under the book. So in this case, I'm using that piece of wood to create some space and kind of make a more 3D effect. And the last way you can do this is just put the book directly flat onto the paper and work around the cover. It depends on how you want your image to turn out, but generally speaking, using something to push the book up over the background makes it easier to layer things later on. So then I just start picking out flowers and other things to fill the image with. I try to keep things balanced, both in terms of how heavy the image feels on all the sides. So don't put, a giant flower on one side without balancing it on the other. And also how colors feel in terms of balance. So you can play around with creating an unbalanced image. It's just not my personal style. I've tried it before. I don't really vibe with it. The overall vibe you decided of the photo along with the colors are going to determine which flowers you're picking out and which elements you're going to use in the picture. So some examples of maybe weird decisions I made in this picture. We're choosing the darker red poppies over using roses, even though the cover has actual roses in it. And I want to talk about that a little bit. So the reason I did this was that the roses that I have are kind of a dusty, dark pink color, as you saw in the earlier shots where I was kind of demonstrating the different methods here. They're kind of dusty pink. And I didn't think they really fit the image. They're really romantic. I have them for that reason. But I still wanted something kind of big, red, kind of delicate looking in the photo, so I opted for the poppies. I don't think it matters that much. I think this was a good choice. So my main tips are just to work around the cover kind of in a circular motion, start off with bigger elements or props and work around those. So normally once I have the big stuff in place, I go in with a lot of smaller stuff and I try to carefully like fill in some of the gaps As you can tell in my photos, I really like to use tiny things, tiny flowers, berries, like all kinds of things. I like to put a ton of detail into my photo without it feeling too heavy, so this really allows me to work around that. So the key here is to work big to small. Another tip is to layer and kind of play around with pushing things further back or closer into the center. So as you'll see in some of my photos, I do kind of put the flowers over the cover, and then some will kind of go under the cover, and that's kind of how you're creating dimension in the photo. So once you have everything in place and you're kind of happy with the way it looks, check it out from the top down, and then you just have to take your pictures. So some tips here, I shoot these on my actual camera, but you can definitely use your phone. If you're shooting on a camera, make sure you're using the 1:1 or the square aspect ratio. Otherwise, when you go to edit and upload, things can get really weird. Your composition might look messed up because when you're seeing it on your camera isn't how it's going to look on Instagram. So having that aspect ratio really helps you compose the image accurately on camera. For editing, I typically do all my edits on these in Lightroom. If you're interested in seeing how I edit my photos or how I have curated my collection of props and some tips I have for that, make sure you subscribe because I'm going to be talking about those topics in new videos in a couple months. So I will be talking about that. Come back if you'd like to see more of these. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel, please, if you want to see more from me. And I will see y'all in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye.